Hi, and welcome back to the Godot community. My name is Sahira Dean. I'm the virtual PLC lead for high school 2D art. In today's webinar, I'm going to share some ideas for how to make visual verbal journals work for you and your students. So I think the biggest thing is to sell the idea to your students. So what I do is start with a lot of student examples, and I kind of just hype up the idea in which they get really excited to see the student work. So selling the idea to your students, making it really exciting is I think the most important. So being very enthusiastic, and when you show them your series of images, maybe that you've collected from the internet or maybe you've taken from previous students, but be very enthusiastic in this presentation. So what we do is start with covers and designs. So I've done years where I start with old textbooks that they actually sand the covers off of if it has like a shiny surface. They go in with like newsprint, or it could be tissue papers, cardboard, and they create their design, through sketching, and then they build it up with, a series of materials. So I'm going to show you some examples in the coming slides. So this one year we used polymer clay, and we kind of construct this idea. So they actually brought their own sketchbook in. They came up with an idea, so the theme for their journal, and they used polymer clay. Let me move out the way so you can see that one. They used polymer clay to, build up the surface and create their design. So you can see like an underwater theme for one, and then like kind of a candy kind of theme for the other. And then this kind of whimsical tree for, the one on my top left. I wanted to include this just to kind of show you some of the sketching and, the process involved in terms of the planning of the journal. So of course we made the objects out of the polymer clay, we baked them in a little oven, and then we adhered them to the cover using epoxy. This is another year where we used cardboard. So these were actually old textbooks that would have been just thrown away otherwise. So with textbooks, as you know, they come with like a shiny sealant plastic coating on them. So you take the sandpaper, sand that off, the front, back, spine, and then you take, now technically you could just gesso and paint on top of it after that, but we use cardboard underneath. They cut out the design with an X-Acto knife or utility knife, and then they took tissue paper along the similar color scheme that they were going to use. So you can see the tissue paper here. What that did was protect the cardboard from deteriorating or breaking down. And they sealed it with a glue water mix. And so it became like hard as a rock. And they used like a paintbrush and their fingers to really get in the grooves. If you do this particular method, it is important to make sure that the tissue paper really hugs the sides. And doesn't like create like a ramp here, because you can easily like poke a hole through that, and it will, moisture and stuff like that will break the cardboard down. So I emphasize that, making sure that all the tissue paper was really nice and clean along the edges. And then they were able to paint using acrylic paint on top. So you can see this student here drilled holes and kind of created like a almost like diary kind of a feel to theirs. One person came in with their initials, right? So the options are very open for this one. And I like starting with the cover, of course, and then really any kind of, if you start with a sketchbook or old textbook, or even if you make a book, like I'm just going to show you some examples in the coming slides. This starts off the process of them really owning the book, right? So they come up with the design, the color scheme, the text, and they approach it almost like they're creating a book based off their interests and based off of, maybe their life so far. So they really take pride in personalizing the covers from what I've seen. This year, my students made their books using old board that I found in my closet. This is my third, fourth year at my new school. So, with a new school comes, a bunch of materials that you may or may not use. So we did some book binding using some thread. So we took old papers. Some of the papers on the inside actually had, old artwork on them. So just promoting the idea of, not always starting with a clean surface, but it was artwork that was left behind. So they knew that they would work on top of that. And this is actually the first year I've done that. And it actually went pretty well. So based on whatever materials you have and whatever things you kind of have laying around, you can always, create a book out of the materials you have. So they had to use, or that they had the option to use colored pencil, ink, paint. And again, this was started at the beginning of the year, and we refer to it, of course, throughout the year. Here's some more examples of, the handmade books. So you can see the book binding, stitching, and then, of course, the covers, were very open-ended. So this student right here was expecting a little brother. So she created hers based off of the ultrasound of her little brother, which she was very excited about. Hers was kind of a caricature of her, and this student loves butterflies. So that was the theme for her cover. So when you present the visual verbal journals, I think it's also important to talk about the rubric and planning. So what I do is give them the homework sheet from the beginning of the year, and it will have all of the entries throughout the year. What this does is allow them time to collect materials. So say they had a birthday and they had an exciting weekend. They could save the receipt or save some pictures or take some specific pictures to document that experience. Or maybe they had a favorite shoe that, they finally, maybe it broke or they got a new shoe. So they retired that pair. Maybe they can cut out the logo on the shoe or keep the shoestrings and incorporate it into their entry, right? So if you provide them with the entries from day one, they can have time to collect different things and really kind of think about things that they might want to experiment in their journal. Here's another example of an assignment sheet. This particular year, I provided some images to give them a starting point. And I will print this out and keep it up in my classroom, so that way it's referred there. I'll give them a digital copy on our classroom platform. And then for students that just prefer a hand copy or like a hard copy, of course, I'll print it out for them. So mandalas, playing with balance, maps are really cool to kind of experiment with. We've done a year where we actually created a game board based off of the theme of their life so far. Right. So the possibilities are endless. But this really helps them to experiment with, maybe artwork art styles that they might not normally experiment with, maybe through a project that you provided or in their personal work. And then it captures the attention of students that don't normally draw or enjoy art because it just gives them another outlet. So students that really, really love to write can, kind of incorporate writing and artwork in this particular space. The planning guide is something that I'll do every now and then. It depends on my group of students. So if I notice students are having a hard time coming up with sketches and ideas, I'll provide a planning guide for them to, just kind of think about the prompt ahead of time or differently. So when I first started teaching journaling, I did this every year, right? So I had a planning guide for every particular entry, which was cool, but I think just in my comfort teaching it also, and, just navigating the room and prompting them with questions, I don't do this as often, but I will if I notice students are struggling with the planning. So this was one of the first entries that we had started with this particular year. Who am I? So it really gets them to thinking about things they like, right? So music, favorite places, favorite songs, favorite movies, so on and so forth. And so with every entry, there is a writing requirement, so some kind of reflection, or if they're really interested in writing, like I said before, creative writing, poetry, they can incorporate that. But they can also incorporate definitions or maybe favorite quotes, or favorite things they've heard. So with this particular entry, they had to incorporate writing about them, things they like, and also blind contour drawings. So I allowed them space to kind of respond to certain questions, and then they can sketch on the back or in their sketchbook. So a really basic rubric, composition, criteria, craftsmanship, and intention, which essentially is, as opposed to students saying, oh, I meant to do it like that, or I wanted it like that, it's if their idea is one thing, but the intention is not delivered, or maybe it's just like it looks unfinished or messy or whatever. So it gets them to think about intention, and of course planning. So if it's the planning guide that they had or completing a sketch that they had to do some kind of preliminary sketch or planning, then it is that they also submit with their final journal entry. And here is some of the planning, just to kind of show you what some students have done. So this is a sketch, planning sketch for this particular composition. And her perspective is a little bit off, right? But I also talk about how in the journals, it's okay if things are a little bit wonky, like it does not have to be perfect. Art does not necessarily have to be perfect anyway. But because sometimes that wonkiness, can kind of add to the idea or just to the composition of the artist. And so this one is her planning sketch for this one, right? So just to show you a little bit more of the planning process. Here's some more evidence of planning and final journals. So this was her planning for this particular entry, and then she had a lot of writing here in the background. And this was the planning for this particular entry right here. I believe this was the one about her. No, I think this was about someone she looks up to. So that was that entry. In terms of media and materials, I a lot of times will allow that to be open-ended. In a future webinar, I will do a demo on some techniques that I show students, just to kind of get your ideas and kind of head spinning a little bit about ways to present this to your students. So thank you so much for being here and tuning into this webinar. I hope you got some great ideas. Do join me on the high school 2D art community, where you can take part in the discussion and ask questions, interact with other educators from across the state of Georgia, and share ideas. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.